Well, Deborah, thank you so much for agreeing to help me in my project. I thought before we get into the interview, if maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, hello. My name is Deborah Sienna. I'm a native of Southeast Texas, which is how I know my interviewer, Nathan Price. We go way back. And I currently live in Houston, Texas.
And you were just asking me about why, what is the purpose of this project and things like that.
Mhm.
And actually, the funny thing is, I created this project to try to cure myself from social distancing. Because unlike a lot of people out there, I've been working from home for many, many, many years, and I discovered that I could go several days without actually interacting with people, either virtually or family. And I started the project back in December of 2019, and the idea was that these would all be in-person interviews, and I would not do anything virtually. And that I would also try to focus more on people I didn't know, like people at the coffee shop or at the mall or on the road. And if you look back at the interviews from like December, January, February, and at the beginning of March, they're all like in person. Um, and anyway, but with the whole lockdown and things, I've had to change my approach and make it virtually.
Well, way to adapt, way to pivot, way to adapt.
I know I'm so looking forward to when I can go up to a stranger and say, "Hey, can we talk?" And we're not wearing masks and
Yes, they don't
um,
spoil.
yeah, I know
Talk to me.
the COVID coil. Sounds like it should be a dance.
Yes.
Um, but anyway, I'm really a big advocate of space exploration, and I thought it would be neat to do an interview every single day and use that as sort of the context and framework. And in terms of ultimate goals, right now it's just basically connecting with one person every single day and having a recording of it. And I try to review these recordings regularly. So I think like next year, I'll have the recording from the year before, so I could kind of look and see what was going on, what were people thinking,
Sure.
and so I don't know what have become of it. I'm really open-ended right now. Right now, I'm just focused on. I've set out a goal: interview a single person every single day to the end of 2024. Which, considering when I started, that's 1,840 interviews. And the only thing I'm committed on right now is just achieving that goal. Everything else is just icing on the cake.
Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah,
That's a lot of people.
I know. I know, and they probably all expect for me to remember everything they told me, and I'm really bad about remembering people's names and faces and details. So, but at least I have some material to review.
Yes, yes.
Just need to
And I
find.
like this idea of being able to connect with other people because this social distancing has really been hard for me. I feel like I've struggled with isolation a lot. So I'm
Yeah,
happy to see another person, even if it's virtually.
I know. Maybe you should start a project like this for the duration.
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't miss him that much.
You know, you're cured already. You only need to think of the project. I like to kid with my niece. She was visiting with me visiting here at my house at the time, and I mentioned the project to her, and she's like, "Yeah, you should definitely do it. That's the way to do it." And she was actually my very first interviewee. But every few months, I'm like, uh, "See what you got me into." So, but did you know that we were planning to send people back to the moon in 2024?
So I was aware of it, but I was not aware of any details. It was like something that I remember reading kind of off in the periphery. So I actually had to do some research before our interview today so I didn't sound like a complete moron.
Well, and you got way more lead than the original targets of these interviews, which are supposed to be just instant acquaintances at coffee shops. So,
So you're saying that I cheated?
well, I'm saying that you took advantage of the opportunities offered to you. So, so what did you learn in your research?
Um, well, we are aiming to put the first woman and another man back onto the lunar surface for the first time since 1973. So that's pretty exciting. 1972, my apologies. So that's pretty exciting. Um, that seems like a pretty tight deadline, honestly. So I'm not sure that we'll be able to achieve that. But even if we're a few years delayed, then I think this sounds interesting. It has a lot of potential.
What do you think about the idea of putting the first woman on the moon? Does that add anything to the project to you, or is that really a significant factor?
Yes, because I remember feeling how proud whenever Sally Ride became the first woman in space. And I feel like I will feel that same sense of investment and pride when we have a first woman to set foot on the surface of the moon.
And I mean, of the 12 astronauts that walked on the moon, they were all men, they were all white, they were all, kind of from military backgrounds. Um, do you think having like the first black person or the first Indian or the first Chinese, um, would be a significant accomplishment? Would make people in those groups feel the same way? And to some extent, do you think they're kind of feeling sort of left out? Or, I mean, like, what are your thoughts there?
So I believe there is a talent pool of people of color that could be pulled from for this project. And I do feel like we've had a very narrow focus on, as you said, white males. But that does not fully represent American society. We're a very diverse society, and I think that science needs to recognize that. I do think the money we have invested in STEM over the last decade has certainly been a worthwhile endeavor, and I would love to see more diversity in the space program.
And what do you, I mean, some people I've talked to, they've pointed out, hey, we're going through a pandemic right now. We have to worry about climate change. And also now we have like severe economic issues that look like they're kind of unfolding. Stock market doesn't seem to represent that, but that's a whole different discussion. Um, how are we sending people back to the moon whenever we have all this going on? And what's your thoughts about that?
Like, how are we justifying this?
Exactly.
I don't know how we're justifying this, to be honest, and my fear is that this project is going to be canceled because this pandemic response is not cheap and the costs are just beginning. So I'm hopeful that the plug won't be pulled on it. I do think that science has worth and it should be recognized for its worth and not just a means to an end. I think we should embrace science for pure science and not how we could monetize something. Um, now, whether or not that's going to work, I don't know. Stay tuned, I suppose.
I know. I think artists kind of have the same struggle, right? I mean, they have like the art that they want to create that, really speaks to them they have, and then they have the art that people are willing to buy. And sometimes at some point in their career, you have to kind of, you see them making a shift towards not their genuine art, but their commercial art. And so you have like this, the genuine need to go discover and find out, but then you have the discoveries that have payoffs, and you're like, you know, hmm.
No, you're completely correct.
Well, that's seldom. I'm definitely making use of that.
Now you have it recorded. You can go back and say, Deborah Vincent Santa said I was correct.
Exactly, and not just correct, completely.
Completely
Yes. Um, so when you think about the future of humanity, like you look out, say, 500 years, what do you see? What does humanity look like at that point?
dude, we're going to be dead.
We're going to be dead?
COVID doesn't kill us and climate change will.
But
So I admit I do feel kind of pessimistic about the future. And part of that may just be the last 3 months and the upheaval that we've all experienced and all the isolation. But I, in a way, I feel uncertain about like space exploration in the sense that like all of the, I guess was it Voyager that went past the outer edges of the solar system just a couple of years ago. That fascinates me. Now, the idea of colonizing other planets gives me more stress because I feel like we have been very destructive on our own Mother Earth planet. I don't feel like we would be good stewards of Mars or other planets. So colonizing things really kind of gives me pause.
But I guess you're not the first person to kind of mention that. In fact, I even had one person early on come out and say, "We've messed up the Earth. Why should we mess up the Moon too?" I mean, that exact phrase. But um, I guess if we mess up Mars and we're like the only people around, I guess the counter would be, so what? I mean, like, how would you kind of like if people aren't here to appreciate
You know,
Mars?
that so what attitude is kind of what got us into this mess here in the first place. I'm sorry, say that again.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. I was just simply saying that, you know, if there aren't people to appreciate Mars,
Mhm.
then does it matter if we were stewards, good stewards or not of it, you know, if people aren't here?
So, I mean, I never will visit Mars, but the thought of Mars being strip mined for whatever minerals it may contain in its crust, that gives me a great amount of sadness. And so I'm fearful that the moon will be exploited with this new exploration. I'm afraid that Mars will be exploited, that we won't just be pure science. It will be what can we take from it, I guess.
Well, and you know that exploitation is largely what our lives are built on. You know, I mean, that's how the lights come on and the computers are made and, you know, our cars are made and our food's made and things like that. So how do you achieve all that without exploitation? I mean, like, what does that look like
On Mars or on the Earth?
on Earth?
On Earth. I don't know. I feel like it's so entrenched that there's really no getting away from it because honestly, exploitation of timber and exploitation of oil and gas is what sent me to college. I mean, it has underwritten my whole life. So I do feel disingenuous by calling it exploitation, but it is. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm articulating that well. I don't know what the solution is. My husband got a Tesla, but that's still electricity. That electricity does have to come from somewhere, but boy, he loves that car.
Well, the thing about Tesla is you could choose where the electricity comes from, but if you have a gas-powered car, you really don't have any choice.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, talking about timber and you know, just thinking about one of the peculiarities of our lives, it's so amazing to think what's in Orange County because of the timber wealth that existed. I mean, I remember going to the tour of the Stark Mansion there, and the you know, the person giving the tour made a point that there's like only 3 death masks that were made of Napoleon. One's in the Louvre, one's in the Smithsonian, and the others at the Stark Mansion in Orange.
Yeah, there was a lot of wealth. But I don't know if you knew this, but my father, Gary Vincent, worked at the paper mill in Orange.
I didn't know that.
Yes, it was Inland Orange, and then later International Paper bought it. And now I think it's Georgia Pacific. But so that was my timber paying for college. And then my mother later became a contractor for ExxonMobil. So that was the other part. Kind of on while we're on Orange County, I guess you heard that Chevron was contemplating putting in a new installation near DuPont off of Chemical Row.
I didn't.
Yes, yes. Do you remember where the old DPS station used to be on Highway 87 and 105?
Yes.
All right. So Chevron bought that entire block of land that used to be just cows in the DPS station. and Orange County gave them all kinds of tax breaks. So I think they were really going to move forward with a chemical plant there and ethylene. But now with gas prices being so low and so much uncertainty, I'm afraid they're going to draw out of that. But that would have given a burst of life into Orange County. Because I don't know if you've been back recently, but Orange County is kind of sad.
Is it? I drive through, you know, the road right in front of the high school. I just did that actually a month and a half ago,
In
and
Orange,
always, well, you know, in Orangefield,
yeah, Highway 105.
yeah, 105. You know, and I was like, wow, look at the high school and look at the water towers and all this, but I wasn't aware that it wasn't doing so well.
Well, I think Orangefield is growing, but Orange itself is continuing to decline. But it would have been nice to have new jobs come to Orange County.
So just coming back to the where are we in 500 years? I, so in your vision of the future, it sounds like you really don't see us branching out to like the moon and to Mars and the, you know, the moons of Jupiter and the moons of Saturn and creating like these big space habitats and sending people other places. Did I understand that correctly?
Small settlements of scientists as opposed to like colonizing families. I just gotta know this says my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Um, but I don't see like families moving to the moon. I don't see families moving to Mars. I feel like it would still be short-term stints, kind of like working in an offshore oil rig. You send scientists on for a couple of months, maybe a year, then have them come back, and you have sort of shift workers.
Um, and you think that would be like the end of it? Like we won't actually, I mean, because, you know, eventually our sun will, you know, in billions of years, our sun will stop working, and that will be the end of life in the solar system. Do you think that's ultimately the end of humanity as well?
That's a good question, Nathan. I don't know. I hadn't thought of it until you just said it. I don't know if I can really answer that. I don't know. I guess unless Jesus comes back. um, but what would be the, I guess what would be the alternative of us sending out, you know, families to look beyond our solar system for other planets to settle? Would that be the end game? You know, it's been so many years since I read like Robert Heinlein, all
Well,
these other authors.
I mean, using today's technology, conceivably, you could create what's called a generation ship, which is basically like a submarine for space that people could live on for, you know, thousands of years, and they would just simply have children and, you know, recycle everything and what have you. And it would slowly make a journey to some other star, and hopefully, it'd be worthwhile once it got there. So that'd be one possibility. You know, we're also thinking that maybe it's possible to do hibernation and send people over these long trips, and then they wake up when they get there. So that may be another possibility. Another thing is, you know, I think we think we know more than we do. Like there's so much in the universe that we don't understand, but even worse, that we don't even know we don't understand. Like, you know, I mean, I think our blind spots are huge, larger than our vision. And I'm just wondering, as we start to look at space from other vantage points, will we discover new things? You know, I mean, in the past 10 years, we had our first detection of gravitational waves. Um, you know, there's, you know, that quantum effects that we're still trying to understand. And if you think back to like, you know, 200 years ago, electromagnetism was discovered by astronomers. And think about how much of our world would be impossible without being able to detect and send electrical waves. But now we just assume that's it. And it's like with every discovery, we have like the wrong reaction. We're like, there's less to discover. But I think it, I think it points out we knew so little, we probably still know little, you know.
But I have a kind of a follow-up to what you just said of how much of that is necessary to have humans involved? How much of that could we accomplish with more probes and robotics?
Yeah, I mean, you make a very good point, and I've kind of struggled with this as well. I mean, the great thing about probes is they're a lot cheaper.
Mhm.
They don't have requirements. They don't have families.
Mhm.
If they die, you know, there's an investigation, but there's no funerals. Uh, I guess I guess it depends on the nature of how the probe was built and funded. There might be funerals, but who knows? Um, um, but you know, I one thing I was thinking was, um, have you ever stood like on the edge, like of the Grand Canyon, or by a tall mountain, or by a building that's really tall, and you're like, man, this building is really tall, and you like take a picture of the really tall building, and you show that picture to somebody, and you're like, this building is really tall, and they're like, I don't see it, you know? I feel like that's sort of the answer to that question, that we might be able to collect data, but it won't exactly have the same impact on our perspective as going there ourselves. And maybe the perspective is ultimately the largest value we can get out of our space exploration.
That's a very good point. Um, how much of an appetite do you think the United States has for loss of life? I mean,
It
think about
depends. It
yeah.
depends, right? Apparently, we don't have the loss of appetite for 7 astronauts, but we are willing to lose, um, you know, tens of thousands of people yearly in car crashes, and you know, through inadequate healthcare, and through wars, and through lots of places. So um, I, I I think it all depends upon the situation. I think we have a huge um, capacity to accept loss of life in some circumstances, and almost near zero in other, and almost seems psychotic. Uh, the fact that that we're able to, that usually the same people are able to justify both.
No, that's a good point because what if we lost 120,000 people to COVID so far in 3 months?
Hmm.
And yet I could not bring myself to watch the SpaceX launch a few weeks ago because I thought if something goes wrong and that explodes, that's a tragedy that I can't handle. I can't even watch it.
Yeah, it's uh, it's something else. I mean, definitely our appetite for losing people in space, our ability to accept people being lost in space, have to be radically changed. You know, and you know, a lot of it has to do with frequency. You know, we had a 737 Max airline crash. People still flew.
Yes.
So I mean, if you're having like lots and lots of trips to space, and then you lose one here and there, that's a lot different than having like very few trips and losing one here and there.
No, that's also a really good point.
Yeah. So how to increase the volume without increasing um, the accidents, so that
Mhm.
you can become more accepting of the accidents, seems kind of, maybe we should just make it safe. I don't know.
Well, I remember in the early days of the space program, there were a lot of tragedies. I can't remember which mission it was, but there was one that exploded on the launch pad and it killed the astronauts inside the capsule. Um,
Yeah, that was sad. This is the Apollo 1 fire that you're talking about, and it wasn't even an explosion. They were actually just doing a testing of it, and they had a pure oxygen atmosphere, and there was a fire spark that started, and oxygen is great at combusting, and they weren't able to get out. So
so, I mean, there's a deep inherent danger to any of this that we're discussing. But there's always going to be someone willing to take that risk. Me personally, I would never do it. I think that's one of the questions that you had posed before was, would you be willing to go? And the answer for me is no, there's no way. For one thing, I get very motion sick, so I can't imagine being strapped to a rocket. But no, it doesn't appeal to me in probably the same way that it appeals to you, because haven't you been up in the vomit comet?
I have been in the vomit comet, and I didn't vomit.
Whoa, you're better than
And
I am.
well,
I would have.
actually, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it because weightlessness, I did not experience any discomfort in terms of actually being weightless. I just felt free.
Mhm.
Of course, you're only weightless for like 30 seconds at a time. And apparently, astronauts do feel discomfort after being weightless for longer periods. So maybe if it was like 5, 10, 20 minutes or an hour or two, maybe it would have been different. But I mean, whenever you're in that free fall, you're just like floating and you feel so light.
Ooh, not
But
for me.
but you have no trouble flying, right?
I'm not afraid to fly, but I often do feel a little airsick. I feel seasick, any sort of motion sick. I usually have to really like breathe through it. And when I'm on a boat, I have to wear that little patch.
Okay.
Um, but I also feel like I personally would not have anything to contribute to a colony on a trip. I feel like I would be dead weight. I'd be the one they'd throw overboard if they needed to lighten the load.
It's so funny you talk about lighten the load. I think your cheerful personality and a positive outlook on life, despite your grim appraisal of humanity, might help to lighten the emotional and social load of such a trip.
Well, okay, I can take comic relief. I could take that role on.
Um, yeah. Well, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to cover?
I don't I don't really think of anything at the moment. I just feel very glad to have the chance to see you again after so long. And I'm so glad you and your family are doing well. And I mean, we're hanging in there. And I really hope your project succeeds and that you have enough people for it and that you can transform it into something like a documentary, something that you could share with us, your adoring public.
It'd be so interesting if the 2024 thing really does happen.
Yeah.
And then say in 2030, people are like, hey, what were they thinking and what have you? And then they could go back and see the kind of these little snapshots of different perspectives as we got closer to that time.
I can imagine that this would be a huge editing challenge. Like, how would you edit together 1,000+ interviews into like a meaningful narrative?
Oh, I know. It's, yeah, that's why I'm just focused on interviews right now. That's a problem for the next decade. Well, thank you so much, Deborah. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Nathan. And anything else you need, just shoot me a text and I'd be happy to help you out.
Need more people.
Actually, I had a thought. So my father and stepmother have bought a lake house on Toledo Bend near Hemp Hill. And that's where Columbia, the debris field from Columbia scattered over. And there is a museum dedicated to Columbia. It's the Patricia Huffman Museum. And the curator of that museum is neighbors with my father and stepmother.
Wow.
So I thought about trying to reach out to her through my stepmother to see if maybe she would be interested in sitting for an interview like this.
That would be wonderful. And even your family and friends, if they're willing to, I I think it's a fairly safe interview. I haven't heard anybody complain so far, and a lot of people say they enjoy it. So, um,
Okay, well, I will put some feelers out to see if I can't drum up any more support for you.
yep. And it doesn't have to be instantaneous. We got 4.5 years to get through.
So there's time.
There's time. Well, thank you so much, Deborah. I'll look forward to talking to you soon.
All right. Have a great day.
Bye bye.